She had a Harvard MBA framed on her wall, a penthouse apartment with a rooftop terrace overlooking the city, a closet full of designer clothes she bought without checking the price tag, a Mercedes she paid cash for, a business that made other women whisper her name like it was a prayer. By every measure the world uses to judge a woman's success, Catherine Elizabeth Moore had made it. She had climbed from a two-bedroom apartment in a part of Detroit where dreams came to die, where her mother worked double shifts at the hospital just to keep the lights on, where her father coached youth basketball for $40 a game and called it joy. She had clawed her way out, one scholarship at a time, one sleepless night at a time, one silent humiliation swallowed down with ambition and determination, until she stood at the top of a mountain she had built entirely with her own hands. And from that mountain, she looked down at every man who approached her and said, "Not good enough. Not him. Not him. Certainly not him." She had a list, a very specific, very detailed, very non-negotiable list of exactly what her future husband needed to be. She had prayed over that list. She had fasted over that list. She had told God with the confidence of a woman who believed she had earned the right to make demands exactly what she expected him to deliver. And while she waited for God to catch up to her requirements, she was slowly, methodically, with extraordinary precision, destroying every good thing that tried to come into her life. Before we dive deeper into Catherine's story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Stories like Catherine's are why we are here. Stay with us. Catherine Elizabeth Moore was born on a Wednesday in October, in Detroit, Michigan, to a woman named Gloria who smelled like lavender and hospital antiseptic, and a man named Robert who could make anyone feel like the most important person in any room just by looking at them. They were not wealthy people, but they were rich in a way that Catherine would spend decades failing to understand. The apartment on Lawton Street was small, the kind of small that becomes intimate when there is love in it, and suffocating when there is not. The Moores had love. They had Sunday morning gospel music turned up loud enough to shake the walls. They had dinner conversations that lasted long after the plates were cleared. They had a father who sat at the kitchen table every night helping his daughter with her homework even when he barely understood it himself, who would look up every concept she did not understand in library books he checked out on his lunch break, who told her every single morning before she walked out the door, "You are extraordinary, Catherine. The world just has not figured it out yet." Catherine believed him. She believed him so completely, so deeply, that when the world eventually confirmed it, when the scholarships came, when Harvard called, when she graduated in the top 3% of her class and signed her first six-figure consulting contract at 26 years old, she took her father's words and somewhere in the translation between his humble kitchen table and her corner office, they changed. "You are extraordinary" became "I am better than this." "I deserve more" became "I deserve more than you." And the girl who grew up eating her mother's home, cooking with gratitude, became a woman who sent back food at restaurants because the presentation was not quite right. It did not happen overnight. It never does. It happened in small increments, the way erosion happens. Drop by drop, year by year, compliment by compliment, success after success stacking up until the foundation beneath her had shifted so completely that she no longer recognized the woman she had become. But everyone else did. The first person who truly saw it was her mother. Gloria Moore was 61 years old, still working 2 days a week at the hospital as a part-time nurse because she said it kept her sharp. She had a small house in Dearborn by then, the house Robert had saved for 20 years to buy, the house where Catherine's childhood bedroom still had the same blue curtains her mother had sewn by hand from fabric bought on sale at the fabric store on Michigan Avenue. Catherine had offered multiple times to upgrade that house, to move her parents somewhere nicer, somewhere that better reflected what their daughter had become. Gloria always said the same thing. "Baby, your father built this house with his own hands." Not literally, his hands were in the planning and the saving and the sacrifice. "This house is us. We are not leaving us." Catherine thought that was the most provincial thing she had ever heard. She loved her parents. She did. But she had stopped coming home as often as she used to. The drive through certain neighborhoods on the way to Dearborn made her uncomfortable now. She would catch herself looking at the houses on her mother's street, the modest yards, the older cars in the driveways, the neighbors who waved from their porches, and feel a kind of restless embarrassment she could not quite name and absolutely would not examine. She was 33 years old, and she had not been home in 4 months when her mother called on a Tuesday evening while Catherine was in the middle of a yoga session that cost $200 per class. Gloria said, "Your father had a small episode at church Sunday. Nothing serious. The doctor says he needs to rest more. We thought you should know." Catherine said, "Mom, why did you not call me immediately?" Gloria said, quietly, "I called you 6 times last week. Baby, you did not pick up." The silence that followed that sentence should have cracked something open in Catherine. Should have. It did not. She told herself she would come home that weekend. She told herself she had been busy. She told herself her parents understood that she was building something important and that this was all for them anyway. All of it, every sacrifice, every late night, every missed holiday. It was for them. She came home 3 weeks later. She parked her Mercedes at the end of her parents' street, the way she always did now, not in front of the house, ostensibly because she worried about door dings, but actually because she did not want anyone to see that car parked in this neighborhood and connect it to her. Her father opened the door before she could ring the bell. He always knew when she was coming. Some kind of father radar she had never been able to explain. Robert Moore was 63. He looked older than the last time she had seen him, which she also had not examined too carefully. He was thinner. There were new lines around his eyes. But when he smiled, when he pulled her into his arms at the front door and said, "There she is. There is my girl," she felt something shift in her chest that felt uncomfortably like grief. Over her mother's pot roast, which was the best thing Catherine ever ate anywhere regardless of what she told herself, they talked. Her parents asked about work. She told them about her latest contract. Her father listened with that particular attention he had always given her. Like every word she said was worth remembering. Then her mother said carefully, "Baby, we have been hearing things from Aunt Shirley about the men at your church." Catherine set down her fork. Here it was. She attended Cornerstone Fellowship in the Lincoln Park neighborhood of Chicago. She had been a member for 4 years. She served on the Young Professionals Ministry leadership team. She was there every Sunday without fail, sitting in the 4th row, dressed impeccably, singing with her eyes closed during worship like a woman who meant every word. And she had, in those 4 years, turned down 11 men. Aunt Shirley had apparently been keeping count. Her mother continued, "She says you turned down Marcus. Marcus, who owns 3 properties in Evanston and practically runs the youth outreach program." Catherine said, "Marcus drives a 5-year-old Honda Accord. He buys generic brand cereal. I saw him do it at Whole Foods. That is not the life I am building." Her father put down his fork. He said, "Catherine Elizabeth." He never used her full name unless it was serious. He said, "Your mother and I have been praying over whether to say this to you. We have been going back and forth for months, because we know how hard you have worked. We know what you have built, and we are so proud of you. We have always been so proud of you. But something is happening to you, and I need you to hear me say it." Catherine said, "Daddy, I am fine." He said, "You are not. Baby, you are not fine. I watch you when you drive up here. You park at the end of the street because you are ashamed of this neighborhood. You sit at this table your mother and I saved for 3 years to buy, and you look at it like it is something less than. You have not been home in 4 months, and when you are here your eyes keep drifting to your phone. You say your standards are about knowing your worth, but baby, worth is not measured in bank accounts. It is not measured in square footage. And you cannot pray to a God who came to earth as a carpenter and then tell his people they are beneath you because of their salary." The table was very quiet. Catherine said, "I do not think I am better than people." Gloria said very gently, "Honey, you parked your car at the end of the street. The drive back to Chicago that night took 4 hours because of construction on I-94. Catherine spent most of it talking herself out of the conversation she had just had. Her parents were wonderful people, but they came from a different time, a different context. They did not understand what she had had to fight through to get where she was. They did not understand that a woman like her, a black woman who had made it to this level, had to be strategic about everything, including who she aligned herself with romantically. A man who undermined her credibility, who could not match her socially or financially, would hold her back. It was not cruelty. It was self-preservation. She had almost convinced herself of this by the time she pulled into her building's underground parking garage. She went upstairs to her apartment, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, the one with the marble countertops and the sub-zero refrigerator and the guest room no guest had ever used, and she stood at the window for a long time looking at the lights on the water. She was 33 years old, brilliant, successful, and profoundly alone. She told herself that was fine. She told herself she was just waiting for the right person. She told herself God was preparing someone for her. What she did not tell herself, what she refused to examine in the dark of her enormous, beautiful apartment, was whether the person God was preparing might need to pass through her first. Whether she might need preparing too. She fell asleep on her couch still in her work clothes, as she often did, because going to bed in that king-sized bedroom alone felt too much like admitting something she was not ready to admit. Her name, in certain circles at Cornerstone Fellowship, had become something of a cautionary tale told in whispers. You know Catherine Moore? Harvard MBA. Runs her own consulting firm? Beautiful woman? Yes. Do not even try. Trust me. I heard she told David Patterson, the one who just made partner at McKinsey, that his net worth was not high enough. Told him to his face. Right after the third service on Easter Sunday. The story, like most stories, was not entirely accurate. It was close enough. David Patterson was 36, a senior partner at a consulting firm, fit, kind-faced, the kind of man who remembered what you said in conversations months later and asked follow-up questions. He had approached Catherine after Easter service with a genuine, unaffected nervousness that she had found, in the moment, almost endearing before catching herself. He had said, I have been wanting to talk to you for a while. I think you are incredible. Would you want to get coffee sometime? She had said, What are you making now? Ballpark. He had stared at her. She had said, I do not have time to invest in something that is not going to align with where I am going. It is nothing personal. I just believe in full transparency up front. He had said slowly, I make very good money, Catherine, but I am not going to tell you a salary to earn a coffee date. You deserve more than a transaction. I was hoping you thought you did too. He had walked away with a dignity that made two women standing nearby turn and look at Catherine in a way she did not like. Her best friend, a woman named Denise, who had known Catherine since their first year at the University of Michigan before Catherine transferred and later did her MBA at Harvard, heard about this incident from approximately 4 different people before Catherine told her herself. Denise was a social worker. She drove a Nissan Sentra. She had been married for 8 years to a high school physical education teacher named Marcus, and she was the happiest person Catherine knew, which Catherine found both admirable and completely inexplicable. Denise said, Catherine, baby, I say this with love and 20 years of friendship behind me. What is happening to you? Catherine said, I asked a simple clarifying question. Denise said, You asked a man for his salary as a condition of getting coffee with him. Catherine said, I have standards, Denise. Denise said, Standards. Okay, let me ask you something. Do you know what my Marcus said to me on our first date? Catherine said, I assume something that did not involve a financial disclosure form. Denise said, He said, you make me feel like paying attention matters. Like what I notice about the world is worth something. And I knew right there that this man saw me. Not my resume, not my potential earning capacity. Me. When is the last time you let someone see you, Catherine? Not your credentials. You. Catherine said, You are romanticizing practicality, Denise. Denise said, And you are calling your fear a virtue. The word landed somewhere and stayed. Fear. Catherine turned that word over for a week without acknowledging she was doing it. She was not afraid. She was selective. There was a profound difference. Fear was what you felt when you did not know your worth. Standards were what you maintained when you did. Except, she thought about her parents. Her father's face at the dinner table. Her mother's voice on the phone. Your father had a small episode. She thought about the car parked at the end of the street. She thought about the guest room no guest had ever used. She started praying differently after that. Not the prayer she had been praying for years, the very specific, very detailed list of qualifications for her future husband. Something more uncertain. something that felt like standing at the edge of a very high place and looking down. Lord, she prayed one night, sitting in the dark in her living room with the city lights behind her. Show me what I cannot see. If there is something in me that needs to change, I want to see it, even if it is hard to look at. It was the most honest prayer she had prayed in years. God, in Catherine's experience, tended to answer prayers like that one in the most inconvenient possible way. The answer came in the form of a parking garage. It was a Friday evening in November. Catherine had stayed late at the office, as she often did, and was walking to her car alone in the underground garage of her building. Heels clicking on the concrete, phone in hand, running through the following week's schedule in her head. She was 3 steps from her car when she heard it. A sound that every woman who has ever walked alone in a parking garage knows. Footsteps that do not quite match her own rhythm. A presence behind her that should not be there. She turned. There were 2 men, young, moving with the specific kind of casual purpose that was not casual at all. What happened next took approximately 90 seconds and felt like much longer. One of them grabbed her purse. There was a struggle. Catherine, who was her father's daughter and had not entirely forgotten that, held on longer than was wise. Her phone hit the concrete. Something hit her shoulder hard enough to send her sideways into the side of her car. The men ran. She stood in the parking garage alone, shaking, shoulder aching, purse gone, phone in pieces on the ground. She stood there for a long time before she started to cry. Not because of the purse, though it was a very expensive purse. Not because of the phone. Not even entirely because of the fear, though the fear was real and large and would stay with her for weeks. She cried because she realized that in the 90 seconds that had just happened, not a single person had been there. Not one person. She had an enormous apartment with lake views. She had a contact list with hundreds of names in it. She had colleagues and clients and church acquaintances and women who air-kissed her at gallery openings and men who sent LinkedIn requests after conferences. And she was alone in a parking garage, shaking, and there was no one to call. She called Denise. Denise arrived in 43 minutes, which included the time it took to arrange for her husband Marcus to stay with their 2 kids. She arrived in her Nissan Sentra in a sweatshirt, with a travel mug of chamomile tea and a presence that said "I am here" without needing to say anything at all. In the car, after the paramedics had come and gone, after the police report had been filed, after all the procedural activity that gives you something to do so you do not have to feel, Denise sat with her in the parking lot. They did not talk for a while. Then Denise said, "Are you okay?" Catherine said, "I do not know." And for once she meant it. The next morning, a Saturday, Catherine did something she had not done in years. She called her mother before 9 in the morning. Not to report an achievement. Not to explain why she could not come home for a holiday. Just to hear her voice. Gloria answered on the second ring, which meant she had been near the phone, which was not unusual because Gloria was always near the phone when she thought Catherine might call, which Catherine had never let herself think about too much. Catherine said, "Hi, Mommy." Gloria said, "Hi, baby. I am glad you called." They talked for an hour. About nothing particularly important. About Gloria's garden and Robert's new interest in woodworking and the neighbors and old stories and family gossip and the kind of ordinary, sustaining conversation that Catherine had been too busy to have for years. At the end, Gloria said, "Baby, come home sometime soon. Not for anything special. Just to be here." Catherine said, "I will." She meant it this time. She went to church the next morning still bruised, with her shoulder aching and the kind of hollowed-out clarity that sometimes comes after a frightening night. She sat in the 4th row as she always did. She sang during worship as she always did. And when the pastor, a 60-year-old man named Reverend Gerald Thompson who had been at Cornerstone for 30 years and had, in Catherine's estimation, seen approximately everything, began his sermon, she listened in a way she had not listened in a very long time. He said, "Someone in this room today is building a house. A beautiful house. All the best materials, all the finest furnishings. But the foundation is not what you think it is. And houses built on the wrong foundation do not fall quietly. They fall in a way that takes everything with them. And when the dust settles, when you are standing in the rubble of everything you thought you had built, God is not punishing you. God is clearing the ground so he can build something real. Catherine sat with that all week. She was sitting with it on a Thursday evening when her assistant forwarded an email from the nonprofit board she served on. The board was planning its annual fundraising dinner. The email was asking board members to confirm attendance. It was signed by the new executive director, a man named James William Calloway, who had been brought in 6 months earlier from a nonprofit leadership fellowship at Georgetown. Catherine had been in exactly one brief board meeting with him, a video call during which she had assessed him in approximately 90 seconds as competent, earnest, and almost certainly underpaid. She replied to the email confirming her attendance and thought nothing more about it. The fundraising dinner was held at a hotel in the Gold Coast neighborhood. It was a nice event, beautifully organized, which Catherine noted with approval. The centerpieces were understated and elegant. The program ran on time. Someone had put real thought into the seating. She was at the bar waiting for her sparkling water when the executive director appeared at her elbow. James William Calloway was 41, which she knew from his bio. He was not what she would have called conventionally remarkable in appearance, which is to say he was not trying to be. He wore a suit that fit him well and had clearly been chosen for function rather than display. He had reading glasses tucked into his breast pocket. He had the kind of face that became more interesting the longer you looked at it. He said, "Ms. Moore, thank you for coming. Your support of the organization means a great deal to us." She said, "Of course. The dinner is beautifully done." He said, "Thank you. I will pass that along to the team. They worked incredibly hard on it." She noticed that. He passed it to the team. They talked for a few minutes about the organization's programming, a subject Catherine knew well since she had been on the board for 3 years. He was knowledgeable. He was specific. He asked her a question about a challenge the organization was facing in the Southside Outreach program that revealed he had actually read her bio and thought about what she might uniquely contribute to the conversation. She noticed that too. Over the next several weeks, there were board-related emails, a subcommittee meeting, a follow-up call about the outreach program challenge, which Catherine ended up spending 40 minutes on and found, to her surprise, genuinely engaging. He sent her an article about a relevant model being used by an organization in Atlanta, with a brief note, "Thought this might be relevant to what we were discussing." No pressure to respond. She read the article. She responded. This went on for 2 months. It was entirely professional. It was also, she realized slowly, the most consistent and substantive conversation she had had with a man she was not directly working with in years, possibly ever. She did not ask herself what he made. She did not look up his address or assess his financial footprint. She did not run him through the criteria on her list because somehow the conversation had started before she remembered to do that, and by the time she thought of it, it felt beside the point. In February, he asked if she wanted to have coffee to continue the conversation about the outreach program in a less structured setting. She said yes. The coffee was at a small place in Wicker Park that he had chosen, and that turned out to have exceptional espresso and a corner table where they talked for 3 hours about things that had nothing to do with the outreach program. About his childhood in Baltimore. His mother who had worked in the school system for 30 years. About Catherine's father and the kitchen table homework sessions. About what it meant to build something that lasted. About faith and doubt and the particular loneliness of ambition. He said, at one point, "I think the most dangerous thing that can happen to someone who works really hard to get somewhere is that they start to believe the getting there was only about them. Like they outran something. But you never outrun where you came from. Comes with you. The only question is whether you are grateful for it or ashamed of it." Catherine set down her coffee cup. She said, "Why did you say that?" He said, "Because you get this look sometimes when you talk about where you grew up. Like you are deciding something." I was not sure if I should say anything. She said, "No, you should have said it." She thought about her parents' house for the rest of the day. She went home that weekend. She did not call ahead. She just got in her car on Saturday morning and drove to Dearborn and parked in front of her parents' house, directly in front, where anyone walking by could see her Mercedes sitting there. Her father answered the door. He looked at her for a moment. Then he pulled her into a hug that lasted longer than usual, and she let it. And when she stepped back, her eyes were embarrassingly wet. She said, "I brought you that coffee from the place in Traverse City you like." He said, "You remembered." She said, "I always remember, Daddy. I just forget to show it sometimes." Her mother made pot roast again. They sat at the kitchen table for 4 hours. The blue curtains her mother had sewn were still in the bedroom window. She noticed them this time with something that felt entirely different from what she had felt looking at them before. Not embarrassment, something closer to tenderness. On the drive home, she called Denise. She said, "I think I have been confusing fear with standards." Denise was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I know. I have been waiting for you to say that." Catherine said, "Is that what you told Marcus on your first date? That he made you feel like paying attention matters?" Denise said, "I actually told him his shoes were clean, but he told me that thing I mentioned to you. And I knew." Catherine said, "What did you know?" Denise said, "That he was someone worth being seen by." 3 weeks later, Catherine called James to continue the conversation. Not about the outreach program. He said, "I am glad you called." She said, "I wanted to say something. I have not always been kind to people. I have told myself it was about standards, but I think some of it was about being afraid. Afraid of the place I came from. Afraid of going back there. Afraid of caring about someone who might not be able to protect me from everything. And I have hurt people with that fear and called it a virtue. I wanted to say that out loud to someone who might understand what I am saying and not let me get away with not meaning it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What made you decide to say it?" She said, "Someone told me you never outrun where you come from. That the only question is whether you are grateful or ashamed." He said, "That sounds like someone very wise." She said, "He is. Alarmingly so for someone who works in nonprofits." He laughed. She had not heard him laugh before. Not like that. It was an uncomplicated sound. There are things that do not make good dramatic stories. The slow, quiet, unglamorous work of becoming a different version of yourself. It does not happen in a single conversation or a parking garage or a pot roast dinner. It happens in the accumulation of small choices made when no one is watching. In the moments when you catch yourself forming an old judgment and choose differently. In the phone calls you actually return and the Sundays you actually go home and the times you sit at a table that is not impressive by anyone's external measure and feel, for once, completely at peace. Catherine made those choices. Not all at once. Not perfectly. Not without backsliding into old habits that she was still working to identify and dismantle. But she made them. She called Marcus from her church, the man who owned 3 properties in Evanston and ran the youth outreach program and drove a 5-year-old Honda Accord. She did not call him romantically. She called him to apologize. She said, "I was rude to you and you did not deserve it. I am sorry." He said, "I appreciate you saying that." Then he said, "You should come to the youth mentorship program sometime. I think you would have something worth offering those kids." She said, "Maybe I will." And then she went because she had learned that maybe I will said out loud to someone who deserved better from you is no longer a maybe. She went home to Dearborn for Easter. She parked in front of the house. She sat in her childhood bedroom with the blue curtains and looked at the street outside. She thought about her father coaching youth basketball for $40 a game and calling it joy. She thought about what joy was and whether she had been confusing it with achievement and whether the difference was something she could still learn to feel. On Easter Sunday morning at church, Reverend Thompson preached from Luke chapter 15. The prodigal son. The younger son who went out and spent everything and came to himself and returned. The father who ran toward him before he even reached the house. Thompson said, "Notice what the father does not say when the son comes back. He does not say, 'Where have you been?' He does not say, 'Do you know what you cost me?' He does not say, 'Prove to me you have changed.' He runs. He runs before the son can finish the speech he has prepared. Because the father was waiting. The father had been watching the road. And the moment he saw his child coming, he ran." Catherine sat in the pew and felt something she had been holding for a very long time begin to come undone. She was not the prodigal son in this story. She understood that. But she thought about the road and about the running and about what it might mean to have someone watching for you. Not for your achievements or your credentials or your net worth, but for you, the you underneath all of it. And she thought about how long she had been keeping everyone at arm's length and calling it wisdom. She thought about James, who sent her articles with the note no pressure to respond and who told her things that were true even when they were uncomfortable and who had, over months of conversation, seen more of who she actually was than almost anyone she could name. She thought about David Patterson with his dignity intact as he walked away from her. She thought about Marcus from church who had listened to her apology with more grace than she had earned. She thought about each man she had turned away, measured and dismissed and sometimes humiliated, and she felt a grief that was appropriate and right to feel. Not a drowning grief, a reckoning grief, the kind that makes you different on the other side. After church, she walked out into a cold April morning in Chicago and called her mother. Gloria said, "Happy Easter, baby." Catherine said, "Happy Easter, Mommy. I love you." Gloria said, "I love you, baby." Every single day. That summer, the board approved the expanded Southside outreach program. Catherine had chaired the committee. James had built the operational framework. It was a good piece of work, the kind that would actually reach people, that would matter in the way that things sometimes matter. At the celebration dinner after the vote, James sat next to her. They ate from the same small catered spread in the organization's conference room. He had bought a bottle of decent Prosecco for the occasion and poured it into paper cups, which Catherine found both impractical and charming. He said, "To things that actually matter." She said, "To things that actually matter." They drank from their paper cups. He said, "Can I ask you something?" She said, "Yes." He said, "That first board meeting. Before any of this, what did you think of me?" She said, "Honestly?" He said, "Preferably." She said, "I thought you were competent. I thought you were earnest. And I thought the compensation structure for your position was probably not reflecting your value to the organization, which I have since recommended the board address." He laughed. That same uncomplicated sound. He said, "That might be the most Catherine Moore answer I have ever heard." She said, "I am working on it." He said, "Please do not work on it too much." She said, "Why?" He said, "Because the woman who reads annual reports and sends annotated notes to the executive director at 7 in the morning is actually one of my favorite things about this board. I like knowing you are paying attention." She looked at him. She said, "Someone told me paying attention matters." He said, "Somebody wise?" She said, "Someone who is becoming a very important person." The first time he held her hand was on a walk along the lakefront on a Tuesday in July, when they had both taken long lunches from their respective offices and met in the middle for no particular reason. It was an ordinary afternoon, hot and bright, and the lake was doing what the lake does, and he reached over and took her hand without making it into something, without a speech or a declaration, just a hand in a hand on an ordinary Tuesday. She thought about all the men she had turned away, all the criteria they had not met, all the lists she had prayed over and the prayers she had offered up like purchase orders. She thought about David Patterson with his dignity, and Marcus from Cornerstone with his Honda Accord, and the earnest, kind-faced man at the church dinner last spring who had asked her to coffee with such genuine nervousness and walked away with more grace than she had given him reason to feel. She thought about each of them and sat with the weight of it in a way she had not allowed herself to before. She thought about the parking garage, the 90 seconds in which she had learned something fundamental about the life she was building. She thought about her father at the kitchen table, about the library books he had checked out on his lunch break to help with her homework, about $40 a game and the joy of it. She thought, what if the best things never had the right credentials? What if love was the most extraordinary achievement and she had been grading it on the wrong scale? The hand holding hers was warm and present and unremarkable in all the ways that were starting to mean everything to her. She said, "James." He said, "Yeah." She said, "I am sorry it took me this long." He said, "You got here." She said, "I almost did not." He said, "But you did." The lake made the sound it always makes, patient and enormous and completely indifferent to human timelines. She squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. There is a room in her parents' house in Dearborn where her father keeps the things he is most proud of. Not a trophy room, not anything formal. Just the wall in the hallway where family photographs have accumulated over decades, layered over each other at slightly irregular angles because Gloria never measured before she hammered the nail. Catherine's graduation photographs are up there. Both of them. She is smiling in both and looks, in the Harvard one, like a woman who is already several steps ahead of wherever she is. Below the graduation photographs is an older picture. Catherine at about 7 years old, sitting at the kitchen table, a textbook open in front of her, her father beside her, both of them bent over the page with the specific focused intensity of two people solving a very important problem together. She looks at that photograph sometimes when she visits. She looks at the girl in it, the one who believed her father when he said she was extraordinary, and she thinks about the long detour she took between that kitchen table and understanding what extraordinary actually means. It is not what she thought it was. It was never what she thought it was. It was always something closer to the kitchen table. The library books, the $40 and the joy of it, the presents, the attention, the hand held on an ordinary Tuesday because holding it felt like the right thing to do. She is 36 years old now. She still has the Harvard MBA on her wall and the consulting firm and the apartment, though she has learned to live in it rather than to display it. She still has a standard, though it has changed in its substance. It is not a financial standard. It is a character standard, which is what it always should have been and what she spent too many years pretending was the same thing. Her father's health has improved. Her mother's garden is producing an unreasonable number of tomatoes this summer, and Gloria texts Catherine pictures of them almost daily, which Catherine finds, against all expectation, genuinely delightful. Denise says, "I told you." Catherine says, "You did tell me." Denise says, "Do I get to say I told you for the rest of our lives?" Catherine says, "Probably yes." Denise says, "Worth it." There are things Catherine knows now that she did not know at 32. Standing at a window overlooking the lake in her expensive apartment, feeling the particular loneliness of a life built for an audience rather than for herself. She knows that pride is not the same as confidence, though they can look identical from certain angles. She knows that fear is not wisdom, though it will dress itself in wisdom's clothing with remarkable convincingness. She knows that the people who try to warn you, the ones who say your name with love and concern and a kind of helpless watching, are almost always right, and that the time you spend arguing with them is time you cannot get back. She knows that God does not grade on the curves she was applying, that the stories she grew up hearing in church about humility were not just inspirational metaphors but operating instructions. That pride goes before destruction was not a threat but a description of a natural law as reliable as gravity. She fell, not as dramatically as it might have been. She was lucky in that way. Lucky that the parking garage frightened her without destroying her. Lucky that Denise drove 43 minutes in a sweatshirt in November. Lucky that her father used her full name at the kitchen table. Lucky that James sent an article with the note "No pressure" to respond. Lucky, most of all, that she prayed an honest prayer on the right night. "Lord, show me what I cannot see." He did. Took some time and it was not comfortable. But he did. This is what she would tell a younger version of herself if she could. Not the 33-year-old Catherine with the list and the Lakeview apartment and the 11 rejections and the car parked at the end of the street. A younger one. The one at the kitchen table. The one whose father was sitting beside her telling her she was extraordinary. She would say, "He is right. You are." And then she would say, "But so is everybody else at this table. So is everybody on this street. So is the teacher and the professor and the kind-faced man at the church dinner who asked with genuine nervousness and walked away with his dignity. So is your mother who sewed blue curtains from sale fabric and hung them in your bedroom because she wanted your room to feel special. So is your father who took 3 buses to work every day and came home and helped you with homework he did not always understand. Extraordinary is not the view from the top. It is not the credentials or the car or the address. Extraordinary is paying attention. Extraordinary is showing up. Extraordinary is parking right in front of the house, where anyone can see you, because you are not ashamed of where you come from or who you love or what they drive. Extraordinary is holding someone's hand on an ordinary Tuesday. That is all. That has always been all. If Catherine's story moved you, even just in some quiet place you have not thought about in a while, I want you to sit with that feeling for a moment. Because these stories, the ones about women who worked so hard they forgot what they were working for, the ones about pride that looks just enough like wisdom to be dangerous, these are not rare. These are the stories we carry quietly. Maybe you know a Catherine. Maybe in some season of your life you were her. And maybe some part of you is still finding your way from the parking garage back to the kitchen table. Whatever you are carrying today, we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Tell us what this story stirred up. Tell us what it made you think about. Tell us where you are in your own journey. This channel exists for you, for women who believe in the power of story to tell the truth that plain words sometimes cannot reach. If you have not subscribed yet, this is your moment. Hit that button. Ring that bell. Because we have more stories coming, and every single one of them was made for you. We will see